Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Unfiltered Vet Discussions. My name is Kelly, and today I'm doing a one-on-one conversation with Stacy Pursell from the Vet Recruiter. Welcome, Stacy.
Hi, Kelly. Thank you so much for having me. It's good to be here with you today.
Awesome. And since some of you are listening to us from various places, I'd just like to remind you that we are on all the major social media platforms. So please follow us there, as well as the major podcast platforms. So please subscribe, share, and follow so that you don't miss any of our fun information that we have coming out. So today is more of a fun conversation that Stacy and I were just laughing about in some of our other calls that we have. And they're the recruiting wars room stories, I guess. It's like the funny stories that always happen in the background, but you never hear about them. So today we're going to talk about them from the recruiter side, or like from the person who's trying to be hired and the person who's hiring. So like from both sides. Um, so yeah, so Stacy, you had some stories you could share with us.
I do, Kelly. I have a lot of stories. I've been recruiting for 28 years. I just started my 29th year in August. And when I got into the executive search and recruiting world, and I was a young person at the time. I was in my 20s when I began this career, and I was learning from some of the old recruiting veterans that had gone before me, and they had some war stories they shared with me, and I thought, wow, those are crazy stories. I don't know if I can top those, and I think I have some stories today that can top those, but I'll start there. So when I started, some of the my mentors, people that I learned from, had stories, and these go way back, but stories of people like a lady, for example, that had an alarm clock, an actual alarm clock back in the day that she put in her handbag and took to the interview, and the alarm clock went off in the middle of the interview to alert her that it was time to leave that interview to go to her next interview. Or this another story they shared with me was a lady that ordered a pizza to be delivered to the place of the interview during the middle of the interview because she hadn't had lunch, so she had a pizza delivered. To the story of the candidate that brought their kids to the interview. You know, the kids were sitting there with the mom in the interview, so they had some crazy stories, but my first crazy story, Kelly, and this goes all the way back to the 1990s, before I specialized in the animal health and the vet space. I started out working with consumer packaged goods companies, Fortune 500 companies, mainly in the food and beverage space. But one of my first consumer packaged goods companies that was in the pet space, they were hiring a VP of marketing. And so I was working with the head of human resources. We were scheduling interviews, and I scheduled this gentleman, and he worked for one of the major consumer packaged goods companies, Fortune 500. It was a cosmetics beauty company. They sold makeup, they sold hair care products. So I'm really excited about his background, his qualifications. He interviewed very well on the phone when I phone screened him, and I just looking at his resume, it was very impressive. And so I sent him in. Couldn't wait to get the feedback from the head of HR. And following the interview, she called me and she just started laughing, and she said, oh, I have to tell you about this interview, Stacy. You're just not going to believe it. So I'm getting a little nervous at this point, and I said, okay, tell me what happened. She said he showed up for the interview with a gold suit, like gold pants,
Wow.
gold jacket, purple tie, like bright
Hmm.
purple tie. So gold suit, purple tie. And she said that he came into her office and he took off the gold jacket and he just flung it over her desk. So she's sitting there and he just throws it on her desk. And so she's got this gold jacket on her desk. And then she said he's got slicked black, greasy hair, and it's all slicked back. And she said he leans back in the chair And she said when he gets up to leave, there's like black hair dye on the back of her chair. And so he gets up, gets his gold jacket and walks out after the interview. And she said there's like black hair dye. He worked for a beauty company that sold makeup and hair products, and they did sell hair dye. And she said it was like he had just freshly put the hair dye in his hair, and it was just sitting on the back of the chair when he got up to interview. So she did not hire him. So that was my first horror story, going all the way
Oh
back
my
to the
goodness. You
90s.
you wonder if the hair dye came out of the chair.
Of the chair. Yeah, I never knew the answer to that, but I'll never forget that story. So, pivoting, so I pivoted from consumer packaged goods, executive search, working with Fortune 500 companies to the pet, the vet, and the animal health space. And one of my early stories was, I'll never forget, I was still in my 20s at the time, and I was preparing a veterinarian to go in for an interview with one of our clients. And I've always prepped my candidates before interviews, where I say, let's hop on a phone call or today a Zoom call, and let's go over best practices for interviewing, because I want you to be prepared for the interview. I don't want, people don't interview every day for jobs. It might be
Right?
every few years. So I'll never forget this gentleman. He said this to me. He goes, I don't need some 20 something year old pipsqueak barely out of college telling me how to interview for a job. He goes, I'm a veteran. I know how to interview. I'll do this just fine. So I'll never forget, the hiring manager called me after the interview, and she said that was one of the worst interviews we've ever had. And so at the time, I remember thinking, well, he did not listen to you. He would not listen to me to go over the interview prep. And that's what I've learned over the years, is it's usually the candidates that have the attitude, that arrogant attitude, that I know more than you do on how to interview. And those are the interviews that don't go well. So another interview war story is, I was sending a veterinarian out to interview with one of our clients, and he showed up in blue jeans that had holes all in them. They were destructed jeans, and he wore a black polo shirt that was very faded. So our client said that the polo shirt should have probably been tossed at this point, because it had been washed so many times that it was no longer black. It was like super faded. And so the client did not hire him because of the way he was dressed. And I asked him later, I said, why did you choose to wear what you wore? Because I gave him the feedback the client
Right.
asked to.
Right.
I said, why did you choose to wear that to the interview? And he said, well, it doesn't matter what my appearance, what I look like. He said, it all comes down to my skills and my capabilities. But our client felt like he was so unprofessionally dressed at the interview that the client, who was very professional and would dress up, in his practice, chose not to hire this person. Um,
Well,
I
it
have,
matters though, right? Because you're finding the right fit. I mean, what you're trying to do is help people match up the right fit
yes,
for I'm looking for a job, I need the right fit, or I'm a business and I need the right fit. Like it's the right fit going both ways. And if somebody's very professional and dresses up for work and I mean, I'm in marketing, so that's their branding, right? That's who they present themselves to the world. They have some guy who looks like, he just came out of the dustbin. It's not a good fit and so he miscalled it. That vet miscalled it for the job.
he did. Yeah, I have another story. So we sent a veterinarian in to interview for a medical director position at a corporate practice group. So this is one of their
Okay.
numerous practices, and she was going in to interview for a medical director role. And she was really excited about the position, before she went in. So after the interview, I got a call from the regional manager, and she had been there at the early part of the interview. So the regional manager had come in and interviewed her, and then she was interviewed by the staff at the local practice. So I get a call after the interview from the regional manager, and she said, we are not going to hire this person. And I said, well, why? What happened? And she said, well, after I interviewed her, And I left, and she was there with the local staff. She said towards the end of her interview, she called everybody in the practice into a meeting, and she said, I am holding a staff meeting. I'm letting you all know that I've identified a number of problems and challenges here in this practice, and I've come up with some solutions on how we're going to fix all these issues. And so I'm letting you all know that on my first day here, that we're going to be making all kinds of changes. So just be prepared for that. So unbeknownst to her, one of the other doctors in the practice that day that, was called into her staff meeting was also being considered and had an upcoming interview for the medical director role. So when this candidate left the interview, this other candidate who was already employed there said, well, I didn't know that you had hired a medical director because I thought I had an interview for the job next week.
Right.
And so this person that we sent in made the assumption that she already had the job when she didn't have the job. They were still in the interview process, and she rubbed everybody the wrong way because she called them into a staff meeting and let them all know she was going to be changing all the things when she got started there. So they didn't hire her.
Isn't that a little presumptuous? Until you actually have the job and the contract signed and all the logistics are worked out, you don't really have the job.
No. Yeah, it was presumptuous. You don't have the job until you have the offer and you signed the offer and ultimately you've, started the position because things can happen.
Right. And isn't there some runway on that? I mean, usually people interview and then there's some negotiations on the salary and the benefits and the start dates and then also then you in her role or his role, you work with the C-suite and the owners of the business to say, well, what are you looking for? Because you have to be all in alignment. You can't
And you
go,
have to
oh,
resign your current job and give them
yeah.
notice, and there's that transition period.
Wow. She was a go-getter though. And so like then people like her and you tell her the feedback, do you notice people change their methodology of getting a job or do they just go gung-ho and keep who they are themselves and eventually land in a good fit?
Well, to answer that question, I was working with a company in the animal health space that was looking for a head of marketing. And this is not the same company I mentioned in my first story, but this was years later. This was just a few years ago. But I was working with this company to find a head of marketing, and I found them, and they were looking for somebody outside. Well, they were open to both, either somebody from inside the industry or outside, but they wanted somebody with some consumer packaged goods experience. So I found them an executive. He was the VP of marketing at a major consumer packaged goods brand. And I sent him in for an interview with this client, and they didn't hire him. And I asked why, and she said he talked too much. He talked throughout the whole interview. He just kept talking, talking, talking. He never listened. And I hardly got a word in edgewise and wasn't able to get all my questions answered because he dominated the conversation. So I gave him that feedback. I had two other clients that were hiring for heads of marketing. So I gave him the feedback, coached him, asked him to not do that the next time. I sent him in for a second interview, got the same feedback from that client that he talked too much. And I probably made a mistake, but I sent him in to a third client. We got the feedback twice. I coached him again. I said, you cannot keep doing this. And I sent him to a third client to interview, got the same feedback, Kelly, and he said, oh, none of those were the right fit. They just weren't the right fit. So instead of looking inward to himself,
Right.
I'm getting this feedback three times. Obviously, there must be something to this feedback because I've heard it three times. And instead of him taking that to heart and deciding to change, he just said, oh, very cavalier, like, oh, they just weren't the right fit.
Hmm. Yeah, some external problem and it's not me,
It's
right?
not me.
It's not me. I'm not it. Huh. Humanity is always interesting, isn't it?
Well, I have another funny story of a candidate going into a vet practice to interview, and this person just in the middle of the interview just starts going through all the drawers in the clinic, just starts opening all the
Just
drawers,
random drawers everywhere.
random drawers, opening the cabinets, looking in the cabinets, looking in the drawers. And after he left, my client called and said, it's kind of like you invite someone over to your home and they're just going through all your drawers and cabinets in the kitchen. And the client asked me to share the feedback. I gave the feedback, and this person said, well, I just wanted to see how they were organized. I wanted to see where all the supplies were and how they were organized. It's like, well, you just don't do that in the job interview.
Or ask, like make it a question, right? So, out of curiosity, how do you organize your system in the veterinary hospital? Can you show me an example, right? I mean, like, yeah, it feels very invasive. I bet
Very
the
invasive.
very invasive, like, that's kind of personal. Please don't do that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh my
I've
goodness.
I've also got some stories from the client perspective too, and and keep in mind these are just a few examples of what not to do. Of course, we've got plenty of examples of things going well and what went right and
Right.
what to do. But um, I have an example. So I have a client that is on the West Coast, and they had multiple locations, and we had a candidate fly in from the East Coast to interview,
Okay.
and she gets there to the interview and the practice is dark, like the lights are
Ooh.
out, there's no one there. And so fortunately for her, she had some other interviews scheduled that day, so she just left and drove like an hour to the next interview, got there early. But we figured out what had happened. The practice manager had resigned, hadn't told anybody that this person was coming in for an interview. The day she was scheduled, they had a relief doctor that was scheduled to come in, and something had happened with him in the morning, and he was like 2 hours late. He was supposed to be there at 8, didn't get there until 10. But she showed up early to this dark practice where there was nobody there, and she called me up, and it took me a while before I could reach somebody. And then finally, when I reached somebody higher up, they said, "Oh, the practice manager quit and didn't tell anybody that this person was coming in for an interview." Um, I have another story where a candidate flew in for an interview, and the hotel that the practice told her to, she got in after 9 o'clock one night in the hotel that she was scheduled to stay in. When she showed up to the hotel that very week, it had stopped being a hotel and they had turned it into a homeless shelter.
Oh my goodness.
So she called me and said, "What do I do?" And so there's 2 hour time difference. So it's after 11 my time because she was going to the West Coast. But I answered the phone and I went online and found some other hotels in the area and gave her a list of other options. But imagine flying to an interview, getting there after 9, showing up at the hotel where the practice tells you to stay, and that very week it's turned into and the practice didn't know, they didn't realize that, but she had a reservation and showed up and it was a homeless shelter.
You just don't hear that one like at all, ever. You know,
Yeah.
like that's just not one that you expect. I was kind of waiting for you to say like a hotel fire or, they triple booked themselves out and there were no rooms or they had a bed bug infestation, but not turned into like a homeless shelter.
Yeah, and it was a nice hotel. It was a hotel that our client was used to putting people up in, so they were really surprised. I have another story from the client perspective. So we had a new graduate flying halfway across the country for an interview with a private practice. So this practice was owned by this gentleman, and he said, "I'm going to put you up in a hotel. I'm going to work on the reservations. I'm going to arrange for transportation to pick you up from the hotel to bring you to the practice." So she gets to the airport and hasn't received a confirmation of the hotel or anything. So she is at the airport. She's checked in. She's at her gate. She calls the practice owner and says, I'm at the gate, I'm about to fly in. I don't have a confirmation for my hotel. Where am I staying? And this practice owner said, well, I just decided not to put you up in a hotel. I'm just going to let you stay at my house. You can just stay at my house. And she got up and she left the airport and she called me and she said, I'm not going on this interview. I said, what happened? She said, he decided to put me up at his house. They didn't know each other. This was a young person last year in vet school. So I called the practice owner and he said, well, I thought it would be very generous if I hosted her at my house. I said, no, that is not appropriate.
Creepy. That's
Yeah,
creepy.
creepy. In fact, I wrote
Creepy.
wrote down the word creepy story.
Yes.
Uh, she was very creeped out. So she canceled the interview, said, I'm not going to interview at that practice now.
No, 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 no. You don't do that. No. Uh-uh. And
No,
that's very creepy.
it's very
Mhm.
creepy.
That goes against all girl rules out there because there
Yeah,
are girl rules, right? Like, I teach my daughters to them all the time. These are the girl rules. Well, that's one of the girl rules. You don't stay in some guy's house you've never met.
no,
No, it's just like that's creepy in capital letters, creepy. Yes.
creepy and awkward, awkward and creepy.
And maybe slightly scary. We can use that. Like we can put a dose of scary in there too. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, it's so true. Um, I have another story. So this was a graduate that was 2 years out of vet school. And this was post-COVID. This was about 2020. Well, it was still kind of in, it was like maybe 2021, 2022. So it's still kind of in that time period. And he was underpaid. He was underpaid at the time. He was making 84,000, had been out for a couple of years. And we had a client that offered him a job for 150,000. And I thought, this is a no-brainer. He's going to take it. And I found out how important his in-laws were to the equation because the in-laws talked him out of it. They convinced him to stay. Their phrase was, "The devil you know is better than the devil you don't know." And the in-laws convinced him to not change practices because they said, you're better off with what you know than what you don't know. So he turned down an offer for 150,000. Now his current practice, when they found out he was interviewing, because he told them he was, they did make him a counter offer, so he did get an increase, but it was not at the same level that our client was paying. And then he did take that counter offer, and like a year later, he was gone from that practice. He'd moved on. He didn't take our client's offer. He actually moved out of state and took a different offer. But the statistics on counter offers show that the majority of people that stay and take counter offers are not with that same employer 12 months later.
Really? There's just what why do they say that? Is it just job dissatisfaction or like you feeling like why didn't you offer this to me in the first place versus the second place and now I'm disgruntled? Is that kind of how it goes?
It's usually the reasons that led up to them, looking in the first place, don't go away. So in his situation, the practice was understaffed. They had lost doctors, they had lost support staff, and it was a very lean team. And so usually it's promises, we promise this, this, and this if you'll stay, and then oftentimes the promises don't get fulfilled in time when the person decides to stay. Or, sometimes it's a cultural issue and the employer, promises to fix that. And then oftentimes the person stays and 6 months later, the culture is still the same. Things haven't improved.
Okay. So it's like putting lipstick on a pig.
Yeah.
You just can't, the pig is still there even though the lipstick's on it, right?
Right.
Okay. I could see that. Yeah. Uh-huh.
Mhm.
Yeah. Wow. Interesting. Okay.
I was interviewing for a position in my search firm a few years ago, and we had a lady show up. It was in the summertime, it was like June or July, and she showed up in wet hair and blue jeans and a jean jacket. I mean, I was impressed with her on paper, and she had an MBA, had some good experience, and showed up in wet hair. And she said, "I'm sorry, I have wet hair, but I'm coming from the swimming pool."
Hmm.
So we didn't hire. I thought, well, if the job interview must not have been that important for her to just come right in from the swimming pool without bothering to dry her hair.
Right, right. Um, on my end, I'm 100% virtual. So we do our interviews all over Zoom, right? Because that's our working environment. So we got to see how you work in that environment. Do you know that we've had candidates that we have not hired, I might want to add, show up men without shirts on? And they're not the bodies you wanted to see. First, you you're kind of like, ooh, like this is, I could have gone my whole life not seeing that. Like, it's not good, and then you're like, yeah, you do know we work on camera, right? Like, it's the way we work here. Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. Let me go grab a shirt. Hmm.
It's just, it's hard to believe some of the stuff, but it's real.
It's
These are
real
real stories. But you think, common sense. You are interviewing. You're going to wear a button-up shirt versus no shirt.
versus no shirt, and you're not, trying out for Thunder Down Under in Las Vegas. You do not have that physique, it's just not there. Yeah, not good. Not good.
Not good, not good. I know. We had a candidate not show up for an interview once, and when I followed up to say what happened, he said, "Oh, I double booked myself. I made a mistake. I scheduled two interviews on the same day at the same time. So I chose to go to the other interview and didn't go to the interview that you set me up for." And I said, "Well, when you figured that out, couldn't you have let somebody know? Couldn't you have
Right?
sent a text or a call or an email?" "Yeah, I just got busy and didn't have a chance, so I just went on the other interview." And meanwhile, our client is, you know, not scheduling appointments for the couple of hours that morning because they blocked off time to meet with this person. I have another story from the client perspective. We sent a veterinarian to interview at the practice, but they didn't want her to come to the practice to interview. They wanted her to meet at a restaurant. So she showed up at the restaurant and waited for 45 minutes, and the client never showed up.
Okay. Do we know why?
Well, I followed up with the client later, and I can't remember what exactly what they said, but something had come up, and they didn't go to the restaurant and hadn't bothered to let her know or me know.
In the day of cell phones and texting, that seems very odd, right?
Yeah, yeah. And these are the highly unusual stories because we remember them. But there was another story of a candidate that I asked him. I said, because I always ask this question, where have you interviewed? Who have you talked to before I start working with them? Because I don't want to send them somewhere they've already gone on their own. And he said, "I haven't gone anywhere. I haven't interviewed anywhere. You're the first person I've talked to." So I sent his resume over to one of our clients, and she goes, "We interviewed him yesterday." And I said, "Yeah, you
A
interviewed him
liar.
yesterday?" I said, I just talked to him and he said he hadn't been anywhere. He hadn't gone any interviews. So I called him back and I said, "We just spoke and you said you hadn't talked to anybody, you hadn't gone on any interviews. And as soon as I sent your resume to this practice, they said they'd interviewed you yesterday." And he said, "Well, I thought the more the merrier." He said, "I thought the more I put myself out there and the more times I applied, the better my chances were in securing the position." And I said, "No, the opposite is true." I said, "Because now you look foolish because client's wondering why we're sending you over there when you just interviewed yesterday.
Yeah, and he lied,
Yes, he did.
which is problematic from an employer's point of view. Lying is problematic for our crew. We don't do that at Beyond Indigo. So that would not be a good fit, right? Because we're like, we all make mistakes, just own it so we can fix it, right? We're human. But don't try to lift the rug and, sweep it underneath there.
Yeah, just be honest, be upfront. Um, and that's the thing. We're in a small industry. We're in a really small niche, and people know people. And
All the
when,
time.
when people lie or don't show up for interviews, those mistakes can follow them. And a few years ago, there was a candidate that approached us, and she was very interested in this specific practice. And when I sent her resume over to the practice, they said, we interviewed her or they said, we scheduled an interview with her several years ago and she didn't show up. And so we wrote her off. And so I asked her about that, and she goes, well, at the time I wasn't interested, but now I'm interested. And I said, well, but you didn't show up 3 years ago.
And you
So
didn't tell them, or, like you burnt the bridge, is what I'm hearing. Yeah.
she, so in that situation, the client, they ended up hiring her the second time when I sent her over. At first, they were not even going to interview her. But then, because they really needed somebody and she was really interested, they were able to forgive and move on, but they almost, wrote her off and didn't consider her. So I had to have that conversation with her about, things that you did even a couple 3 years ago. They follow you around. People remember.
So what I'm hearing you say so far in your stories are lack of communication on both sides, like happen. Like nobody's picking up the phone or a text message or being like, hey, I'm going to be late or I can't make it or I'm not interested, one of those two things. So if you're interviewing somebody or wanting to be interviewed, you should communicate, right? That's a number one thing I'm hearing. Number two is don't lie. Be honest about it, right? And number three is really double check those hotel rooms. And use them. Don't put somebody in your house. Use the hotel, check the hotel, make sure the hotel is open and being used as a hotel, versus just assuming, right? Because I mean, it's an easy thing because we all think a hotel's a hotel. Who would think it would become a homeless shelter? But those are kind of like I would assume those are just assumed things. Like I would assume that if I was interviewing somebody and they couldn't make it, they would tell me, like, hey, I'm sorry, my kid threw up today. Can we reschedule? Yeah, okay, I get it. That makes sense, right? Sure. I also understand as an employer, you might be looking at multiple interviews. I'm sorry, I'm double booked today. Can I, whatever. It's the communication part that's so key. And it seems to be a low-hanging fruit that gets missed, is what you're saying.
Yeah, communication is key. I mean, just this morning I had a client whose kid got sick and she had to reschedule, but she reached out to let me know that. She said, "I'm so sorry, but the doctor is only available at the time during the interview." So I reached out to the candidate about rescheduling, and it's not a problem because we had several hours of advance time, to know this, versus somebody just showing up and the other person not being there. So it all goes back to communication.
Yeah, and it's so vitally important. You know, it's not that hard. We have a phone with us all day long. I don't know anybody who doesn't have a phone with us.
We have we have countless tools now. I mean, we have, like you said, the phone, we can text, we can call, we have email, there's LinkedIn, there's multiple ways to communicate with people. But when you schedule an interview, the first step is to show up, be
Yeah.
there on time, be prepared, show up with your resume, have good communication, have good follow-up. Don't make assumptions when you get there about anything, like I can go through the drawer or I have the job or, it doesn't matter what I wear, as long as I have a DVM degree on my resume, because everything matters when you're being considered for a position, how you dress, how you communicate, being on time, integrity, all of those are important.
Yeah, and you work closely with the people you get hired into with, even, be it corporate, be it small business, you're elbow to elbow deep. And especially in the veterinary space, I mean, I'm unusual because I'm 100% virtual, but we do marketing on the internet, so that works. But otherwise, it's a hands-on fur job if you're in the veterinary hospital. You gotta be, you gotta understand the people around you.
Yeah, it's vital. It's vital.
It,
Culture is so important. Like you said, you're working with those people, and it comes down to respect, respecting people's time.
right. So as we wrap up this podcast, what would be we just named some of them, and you may agree with it, but what are like three things both sides should do that you would say in order? And then we'll close it out today. But what would be the takeaways besides the ones I listed? Are there any more besides communication, or what is the advice you give both sides usually? Let
You
me
know,
put it that way.
treat people. It all comes down to treat people as you'd want them to treat you. I mean, would you want to stay at somebody's house you didn't know for an interview? Would you want somebody to just not show up for so just treat people well, be respectful, communication. It all comes down to human respect and decency. Treat people as you would want them to treat you. Be respectful and over communicate. I always say if you're communicating at just the right amount, you're probably under communicating. So it's better to over communicate to make sure, because sometimes messages get lost with all the communication tools out there. People are getting communications from all different sources. So over communicate to make sure that people are hearing from you and everyone's on the same page.
Wonderful. Well, thank you, Stacy, for being a guest on Unfiltered Vet Discussions today. I've enjoyed listening to the stories, and I might be chuckling now throughout the day as I rethink them and play them through my head, going, really? They did that? That's awesome. But like I said, humans are amazing, amazing human beings. I mean, why do we people watch in airports, right? Like we just sit there. I was just at the Ren Fest. I'm like, wow, this is good people watching today. This is amazing, right? So we always bring something to the table as humans. And just a reminder to our listeners and viewers, please like, share, and follow us on all our social media platforms and podcasts. Until then, we will see you later. Thank you.
Kelly, it's always fun to talk with you.
Likewise, Stacey. Thank you.
Thank you.